working in property. The building safety regime, the landmark legislation is just about to come out next year, has resulted in a seismic shift in accountability for building safety, with building owners, investors, developers now more than ever being thrown into the spotlight. So that shift I see as a catalyst for a new culture, new governance, a new organisational design, and change across the residential sector. None more so evident as in the BTR sector. So the demand for information, the demand for software and support is ever growing, and I see no sign of it slowing. So with me today to discuss these themes and these issues and more hopefully are some key players in our industry. So I'll just introduce them. On my left we've got David Hills. David is a Senior Director at Art Workplace Risk, who have been providing professional services and software to the property industry for over 25 years. Next to David is Sue Petrie. Sue is a Director of the Managing Agent, the UK Managing Agent Rendell and Rittner, who've just been in business for over 30 years now, so leading experts in this area. Sam Smith, next to Sue, he's the National Head of Operations at Dandara Living, who are key players in the BTR sector. I think Sam's business understands firsthand that relationship between owner and managing agent. And finally, Rick Ather is a partner at Shoesmiths, the London law firm of the year 2022. Congratulations to you and your colleagues on that one, Rick. The real estate division specialises in the complexities that we're about to face in this industry. So it'd be great to get Rick's input from that side of things. So to kick things off, I'm just going to ask a few questions of the panel. I'm going to start by looking at the decisions that we need to make as businesses. So the lead up to the implementation of the Building Safety Act has been a time of big decisions. So David, if you don't mind if I start with you, what decisions have you and your business had to make as a result of the changing legislation?
For a consultancy, we don't have to make too many decisions. Our clients have to make decisions. I would suggest at the moment the biggest decision that clients are having to consider is who is the accountable person. The bill is introducing a new role, accountable person, which invariably is the owner of the property, the developer, etc. And as accountable persons, we're effectively seeing a switch. We're seeing a flip of responsibility. It used to be that once a building went through PC, they used to hand it over to Sue's team, and they would then manage it. That approach has changed. That approach now means that as an owner, as an investor, as a developer, they are taking more accountability. And so I think the biggest decision is actually deciding who is going to be accountable, who ultimately is going to hold that accountability. Because if we don't get that right and we don't get it done now, we are going to miss the boat. And we're already seeing a number of organisations where accountable persons cannot be agreed. And if we cannot get that agreement before April next year, you will not be able to register your buildings. If you can't register your buildings and you have to go to, for example, tribunal, you will then find yourself in breach. So I think the biggest decision at the moment is going to have to be who is going to be accountable. And I think organisations need to be dealing with it now.
Sue, does that resonate with you? Does that those decisions, the sort of decisions Rendell and Rittner are making right now?
It does, yeah. I mean, we've... Oh, God, that's very loud, isn't it?
That's some feedback.
I'll try and talk more quietly, or shall I lower that down and see if that makes a difference? Is that okay? That's better, okay. Yeah, so, I mean, this is something which has been ongoing for a number of years now. And a lot of our clients have got a very, very clear view on this and are taking on teams who can sort of act in the role of accountable person, or, you know, in some cases principal accountable person, because it's very often more than one. But then other clients are sort of coming to us and saying, well, what are you going to be doing about the Building Safety Act? I mean, obviously we've got good plans in place, but I think that there's a bit of a slow dawning amongst some of our landlords, our clients, that actually it's for them to do a lot of this, or at least to decide how they want to manage this, and they can't abdicate responsibility for safety. Having said all that, the sorts of things that we've been tracking and monitoring is how we deliver that. And some of it is about not making too many decisions too quickly, because had we been making decisions around recruiting a team of building safety managers 18 months ago, then we would have come a cropper over it. So some of it is a judgment call to know that you've got enough expertise within the business, but actually, how do you structure that? And even now, you know, the legislation has passed, but a lot of the regulations aren't. So we've got a meeting tomorrow with a company that is working with the HSE on the guidance for the safety cases, and you know they've sort of like shared a draft of that. But I think one of the challenges that we have around decision making is that it's just not clear enough yet. And yeah, we have to be quite agile in our responses to the regulations in order to make sure that what we have is good outcomes that actually make buildings safer, which is what this should actually be about.
Yeah. I think your point about the changing legislation and the fluidity of it at the moment is very valid. Sam, you work with Dandara. You're making these sort of decisions. What's left to be done at Dandara? What decisions are still to be made there?
We've gone through a period of just restructuring our facilities team. So as preparation for the Act, we have brought in a dedicated role, which is spearheading our facilities business. So instead of it kind of merging into the overall operations, it's now a complete business function on its own. We've restructured the team in the fact of behind the door and the communal areas. So we've got tech leads for both, because we see that there was too many blurred lines of trying to get our maintenance teams to focus on health and safety as well as pre-planned maintenance. So that's been a big change that we've brought in. And a lot has been about educating our investors as well, because obviously, as we've been talking about, it's not just our responsibility, it's the overall relationship. So we've taken them on the journey with us. There's been some additional headcount that we've had to bring into the business to obviously get the sign off for that. And working obviously with ARC, with yourselves, you've led us very much down the right path, but there's still a lot to do in the fact of, like you're saying, who's taking the responsibility and the accountability. I think we're very close. There's still some work to be done, but I feel confident we're on the right track now, and how we're going to manage that moving forwards is becoming clearer.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it all starts to become clearer after today as well. I think there's a big piece around organisation that I want to explore. I feel, having worked in the property sector for a number of years now, certainly the last year, but perhaps the last 2 years, as we've seen post-Grenfell, we've seen this legislation start to creep towards us, and now it's nearly upon us. I've witnessed organisational structure changes, and I want to explore that a little bit, because I don't think the structures of our businesses necessarily are geared up, or certainly weren't geared up for what we're about to encounter. Rick, if I can come to you next. Your position at Shoesmiths, I just want to kind of explore that organisational structure change and ask, is there a risk of a skills shortage in this industry?
Well, I think common with most of my colleagues on the panel, and no doubt the audience, I think we're much the same as everybody, trying to run with the sort of development of the legislation to get our head around it and understand what the implications of it, primarily for our clients in truth. And that could be developers or investors, etc. And Sue's already said that whilst the Act's come into place back in April, it's been in there for 6 months or so, but much of it hasn't yet come into effect. Provisions of the Act itself come in a staged process over 12 to 18 months, and the regulations are in consultation and coming out now. So people are very much trying to get their head around what the implications are for everybody, whether it's designers, contractors, developers, investors. So it's not affecting Shoesmiths in a way of organisational change in ourselves, but we are very much having to run with everybody else to try to keep ahead of what the legislation means for our clients, to advise them on what their potential organisational changes are. And I focus very much on the front end of things, construction and design, over to, you know, up to the point of PC and hand over to these guys. But I think there's big implications for clients in terms of the new duty holder regulations, implications for designers and contractors, particularly the new roles of principal designer and principal contractor in the context of building control approval, which shouldn't be confused with CDM terminology. Very much the same, but it's going to be a different role. It's going to require a different competence. I was speaking to David the other day about this, and you know that training and that upskilling of that new role may well be one of the biggest sort of skill shortages for the industry if people are going to take on those roles and will need to transition, much like in 2015 when the CDM regulations came in. There was a lot of reluctance on architects and various people to take on a principal designer role in that context. But this context is almost a step further forward in terms of responsibility with potential criminal sanctions behind failures. So I think it's really important for you know, those types of roles and the client's increased duties to kind of get their organisational structure and the processes in place to prepare them for, you know, appointing those individuals, checking competence and various other things.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting you talk about those sanctions, the potential sanctions, and we'll explore that a little bit more because I think that era of accountability is upon us. David, I know you've got some thoughts on accountability, on the new sanctions that are coming out. If you can share those with us, you know, what's in store for people once they become accountable, once they've established the accountability, what's in store for them potentially?
It's very difficult because, as everyone's saying, that the legislation is still going through. What we are very clear on, though, is that the sanctions have been increased significantly. We're talking for certain breaches of up to 2 years imprisonment and unlimited fines for organisations, which have never been in place in the past. And we've got a new, especially in property anyway, we've got a new issue in respect of understanding what's called consent, connivance and neglect. Organisations, for example, have got to, from the top down, ask the right questions at the right time of the right people. It doesn't matter how far you are away from the coalface, you have got to be asking those questions as accountable persons. You can't just leave it to the managing agent or to someone else within the organisation to take accountability. As accountable persons, senior managers, directors, CEOs, etc., have got to be involved. And if they don't, then they are going to find themselves in some serious problems. As I said, you could in fact lose control of the property. The property could be taken into what's called special measures by the regulator. And there's a whole host of issues that come out of that particular element as well. So the sanctions are quite worrying, they're quite draconian, and from what we understand talking to the regulator, they have no intention at the very beginning of going light.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'll see some groundbreaking case law coming out very soon after implementation, which is always the way. And I think the points that were made about CDM and the slow uptake of CDM, and I still see CDMC roles advertised in on LinkedIn, etc. So it's still not 100% there. So I think that's a given. In terms of structure, so you made the really good point earlier that had you gone full tilt into recruiting building safety managers, you'd be having some difficult conversations right now. So of course all that building safety manager role stuff is still there, but that role is not there anymore. So how have you seen your organisation change over the past year with reference to this bill?
I would say salaries for health and safety experts have gone through the roof, for starters.
Yeah, of course they have.
In some ways, we're quite fortunate. In other ways, not so much, because over the last few years, we have been having to deal with the what's commonly known now as the cladding scandal. So we've had to build a team of individuals who are coordinating remediation through the Building Safety Fund. But I guess what that's helped with is that you've now got that core of expertise, which has been drawn mostly from within the business, but they've become quite skilled in matters relating to fire safety. And I think our plan really, and we work quite closely with ARC, as you know, so the fact that you can call on that real expertise, that technical expertise when needed. And it has to be a blend really, because you have to have individuals that know the buildings inside and out to be able to gather all the information together that's needed. But then you do need to be able to draw on that external expertise, because I think there's few management companies who would be able to resource that fully and have that whole range of skills that you're going to need. So we're taking very much a blended approach, which again helps us to be a little bit more agile and responsive as we get a better understanding as to what the regulations are. But and I don't know so much whether this applies within the purely within the build to rent sector, but one of our challenges is we've got buildings which are several years old. Some of the information that you require, we've just never had that. If you've had a number of different managers involved, there was never that thoroughness in handover that we're absolutely going to need going forward. So we've got real challenges around drawing that historic information, which we're definitely going to have to call on experts to bridge some of those gaps.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I want to talk about information in a little more detail now. I would say the exchange of information and the gathering of information is a critical part, it's a central tenet really of the forthcoming legislation and part of this new regime. So I kind of want to explore how your organisations are equipped to deal with it. David, you work for a company that deals with managing information. Can you talk us through what type of information they need to be managing? And talk a little bit about Sue's issue there with that retrospective gathering of data. How important is that?
The type and amount of data that we believe is going to be required, both in respect of development through PC into in use, is at the moment up in the air. Unfortunately though, we've got to be ready by April when the legislation starts. So what we're advising many of our clients is to capture and gather everything, just in case. But the most important element is making sure that you've got a technology solution that's going to be able to support you on that process. It's not just about capturing the data. It's not just about having all of your, what's called the golden thread. It's about being able to manage that and being able to tell your story. Tell your story to the regulator, tell your story to the residents, tell your story to the likes of Greg or your insurers. Because if you don't have that information available, you're going to have some major issues. And as Sue said, the vast majority of properties in the past have ended up being managed with very, very little information being passed over. That will not be allowed. We've got 3 gateways that will require some very robust hard stops. If you do not provide the information, A, to the regulator to start off with, and B, to the accountable person, you will not be able to pass through your gateway. And some of those gateways are going to require up to 12 weeks notice to be able to go through. That's fine in very simple terms in respect of a commercial property. Delays will happen. Come to student accommodation, you can't afford 12-week delays. You're going to really have to start thinking about how you manage that information right at the very start. If you don't have it, you're not going to be able to get through those particular gateways, and you're going to have to provide information digitally as well. So you've got to be able to ensure that digital information is passed in a digital form.
Thank you, David. You mentioned Greg, and it's time I introduced Greg. I saw Greg slipping into the side there, fully unaware that we were actually starting our session early. Apologies, Greg. Greg Spiteri is the director at Gallagher's, the insurance company. So it'd be really good, Greg, to pick up on what David was saying there about that exchange of information and the types of information that you're looking for in the insurance market, if we bring that into play now.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess before I answer that question, I think one of our biggest issues is this thorny issue of life safety versus building safety, which has been our biggest challenge, I think, certainly over the last 2 years, and what is acceptable remediation for a start. I think the insurance industry views that very differently from to a building regulation point of view. So therefore, where we've had a mismatch in terms of, let's say, a B1 accredited building isn't always what an insurance company will deem to be a great risk. There's so many variables in that, it's very difficult. So, ergo, we've been asked to collate more and more information and to take up, Sue and David's point, the information isn't always there, which is rather worrying, but also probably a mark of where the industry has been. So we have very little time to gather a lot of information, and as one of the companies right in the epicentre of the current sort of FCA investigation and the work we're doing with the DLUC department and our own trade associations and the ABI trying to find solutions, because the outcomes to some of this has been very unpalatable for the end user, be it the lessee or the person paying the bill at the end. So what we're trying to enable is good customer outcomes, and to do that we need lots of information. And it's obviously there's been a lot of focus on cladding and different types of cladding, and even that journey from 2020 to now is very different. The industry has gone through a very steep learning curve, as we all have, and often we get criticised for the amount of information that we do gather, and that's something I think that's probably going to be one of the biggest pieces of work we have over the next 6 months, is how we drive that information into our proprietary systems. For us, it's to do with presenting risk to the market. And if anyone that's had a look at the FCA report, I think one of the most marked thing is that the reduction in insurers that will write this business. So the contraction to sort of mainly 5 players in this market makes broking those risks really difficult. And even more difficult if it's on a standalone basis as opposed to a portfolio. But nonetheless, the underwriter is looking for those bits of information around compartmentation, insulation, cladding, the presence of wooden balconies, as well as risk management. So we also need that time to present the risk to the market in its best possible light to ensure that there is a positive outcome. But we're very interested in the golden thread. We're working very closely with insurers to ensure that their information is right and appropriate, and that it dovetails, really, because otherwise we're all working in silos and it's really, really difficult.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I'd be interested to get your take on this from a legal perspective. What Greg's been talking about there is the level of information, the detail of information, how far back do we go, etc. What's your finding so far in the legal sector?
Well, I suppose in terms of information, I suppose we will have any better information than the guys around this, who are on the upside. Industry's moved on quite a bit, I think, over the years, because BIM came in, and so the ability to store information electronically has moved on. And I'm sure a lot of professionals in the room, consultants, architects, etc., will be thinking about how they're going to present all this information as part of the building manuals and as part of the final certificate applications to get approval to then go to upstage for the building to be registered and to get a final certificate. Just as a slight divergence, if I may, with the benefit of Greg here, I think something really interesting from an insurance perspective that I think the market is waiting to hear where it's going is the kind of cover for things like professional indemnity insurance for architects, developers, contractors in the territory of, well, not only the new roles, but also in the context over the last few years, the market's contracted in terms of fire cover, cladding cover, so those exclusions are fairly common now. So a lot of consultants have no cover in that territory at all, have they? And even, ironically, some fire engineers have got fairly limited fire cover. they have to kind of write it back in. So I don't know, Greg, have you got a feeling about the way the industry's heading into this and the sort of extended liability for 15 years and things like that?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, and we've worked with Bieber a lot around this, is and it's similar to the cladding situation, is trying to find a kind of a pooled solution. What we, generally speaking, you know, there's not many sectors in the insurance industry at the moment that haven't gone through hard conditions, and the PI market has been probably the standout in some ways. And I know there have been, you know, pooling moves and to rectify some of that and bring more capacity into the market. Because, I mean, you've seen probably doubling premiums and halving of limits, which isn't very helpful. But what tends to happen in the insurance market is that there is always troubled waters in certain areas. And of course, without diverging from your question, it's driven by claims. So there's been, you know, an uptick in claims. It's the same with the buildings insurance sector. And it's not just fire, it's mostly escape of water and our changing climate around flood, etc. So it's been a kind of death by 1,000 cuts almost, whereas what you need, certainly as a broker, we're trying to attract capacity back into the market through sensible strategy, long-term strategy and sensible pricing. And I think that's what will bring capacity back, whereas we've seen quite a lot of soft market conditions over the last 20 or 30 years, which have sort of probably come home to roost a little bit. So we need to get back on an even keel, I think. And I think I see some signs of that. I'm not a PI expert, unfortunately, but I think that there is signs that there's a little bit of a flattening. But we've got a reinsurance renewal season to get through, so we'll see what 1/1 brings, and then, yeah, who knows? It's hard to predict at the moment, but hopefully it will come back a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I appreciate that the insurance market is just another aspect of what we're all going through, and I think it affects us all in different ways. And it's one of those relationships, and that's what I want to talk about next, really, and just kind of focus towards the end of our discussion now on the sorts of relationships that we're having, because we think of these relationships historically as there's an owner and a managing agent relationship, and there's a managing agent and resident relationship, etc. So perhaps we'll start with Sue and Sam, because you're working really closely in the middle of those sorts of relationships. How you see this new focus on accountability affecting your businesses, where you see these relationships have changed over the past year?
Sure, I'll go first.
Yeah.
Okay.
Certainly within the context of as a managing agent, we've got groups of leaseholders. Part of the legislation is going to be about engaging with them and giving them a voice when it comes to health and safety. And of course, very often they are our clients. We have residents management groups. If I'm honest, the vast majority of people do not want to sit and talk about health and safety. They kind of want to know there's an assumption that it's happening and it's happening well in the background. So I suspect one of our challenges is actually going to be finding ways to engage with leaseholders in a way that they have an interest in it. So we're thinking a lot about how you provide the right amount of information for them in a very easy format. Whether that's some sort, we have a portal anyway which can support that. That's one challenge. As I said before, the other challenge is our relationships with our clients is a different dynamic. So we are hoping and expecting that they will want more information from us when it comes to fire safety, in their role as responsible entity. So we're looking at how we can make that very easy for them in real time, and again through sort of like technology, so that they've got really good access to information on health and safety to give them the comfort that they need. So I think technology is a very important solution, element to that solution. But we can't just assume that that's what people want. I think those conversations and having practical conversations with residents and making sure that they understand the role that they play in this as well. And educating them is going to be a huge part of this, I think, because it's very often the behaviours of residents which create a lot of the dangers in the first place.
Yeah. Sam, are you seeing the same sorts of things?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've tried to be as proactive as we can to take our investors on the journey with us. We've enlisted, obviously, help of SMEs to have various conversations with our clients as well. So it's not just us telling them that this is what we need to do and the legislation changes coming through. It's been well received. There's still elements of buy-in that we're still trying to get. I think you touch on residents there, and that's probably one part that we haven't quite touched upon yet within Dandara Living. But you're exactly right. The residents have a part to play, and that's going to be the next piece for us in terms of how we educate the residents to the changes, because there's going to be more frequent visits that we're going to have to do behind the door. So we're already starting to have conversations internally about what that looks like and how we can kind of dovetail that into other things that we need to be doing at the same time. Technology for us has been key. I think when we did a gap analysis at the beginning of this, we see some gaps that we needed to fill. And with the technology solution we're bringing in, that's massively going to help. The remit, what I've said to my team is I want us to be in a position that anybody can just walk through our door at any time and audit us, and we've got all that information. It's all up to date. It's not, having to scurry around in the background trying to pull it all together. We've got it in one central place, and that we can access that at any time. And key for me as well in my role is to have that sort of dashboard system that you want to have to be able to see how the business is performing and just monitoring that really closely. So we're on the right path, but I think as David has touched on, there's still a lot to come out that we need to kind of prioritise how we're going to overcome certain challenges.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I mean, I think with the couple of minutes that we've got left, David, if I could just ask you just to summarise the points that Sue and Sam have made there about that sharing of information, about that that technology piece. Where are we with that? How has that changed? You've got 2 minutes, so bear that in mind. I know you could talk about this all day.
Yeah, relationships. I think we're moving into an era where alignment is going to be really, really important for all parties. It used to be that we had 1 or 2 people that we used to speak to, which meant that there were 2 or 3 lines of communication. Move it up to 4 people and we've got 6 lines of communication. Keep going, get up to 14 people and you've got 98 lines of communication that all need to be talking the same language when it comes to safety. So technology is going to play a really, really key role. You've got to make sure that technology doesn't just deal with the storage of data, but as Sue and Sam have said there, it takes that to another level about communicating with residents, communicating with regulators, communicating amongst their own teams. And it's really important that technology piece is thought about really carefully, but we haven't got much time. And that's really what I would say. You need to be looking at it now.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'm going to just very quickly sum up now, and we'll finish this discussion. I think, David, I think you've hit it on the nail on the head there. I think we've got, just as we're running out of time on this lectern, I think we, as an industry, are running out of time, and we've known about this legislation for a while, but like all these things, it's upon us now. We're looking at the early part of 2023 before this becomes really very, very real for us. So now is the time. If you haven't started now, then now is certainly the time to start. I'd like to, again, thank UKAA for allowing us to share this platform. I think you'll agree that the panel assembled here are knowledgeable and expert, and I very much appreciate sharing a lectern with them. Thank you very much. We could probably talk about this all day, as you probably gathered. We will be here for most of the day, so please feel free to engage any of us afterwards. But thank you very much for listening.